Welcome. We are going to begin. It is 6:31, so we will begin now. Good evening and welcome to our budget hearing for the 2026 diocesan budget. I want to note up front that we have both ASL and Spanish language interpreters available. So I'm going to introduce Mildred Reyes, who will give you instructions on how to connect to those interpreters.
Good evening, friends. It's so great to see all of you. So for tonight, if you need ASL interpretation, they are available in this meeting. You can click the caption at the bottom of your menu there. Look for the ASL interpreters in the Zoom window as well. They have been labeled. Pin those to your video. When slides are shared, select the side-by-side view in your menus. In addition, we have interpretation, Spanish-English language interpretation. También hoy en la noche tenemos interpretación de inglés al español. Para seleccionar el idioma, por favor, miren el icono que dice interpretación que tiene el mundo. Ahí va a hacer clic en el botón de interpretación. Va a seleccionar español para escuchar la reunión en español. Y para hacer preguntas, pueden hacer clic en el cuadro que dice chat, puede escribir su pregunta. El intérprete le hará su pregunta en inglés a los presentadores y ustedes escucharán la respuesta en español.
Thank you, Mildred. All right. So as we've noted, we have an interpreter. So what that means for those of us who are speaking tonight is that we need to speak clearly and slowly so we can get that message across. So good evening again. I'm Tom Sinclair, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer with the Diocese of Washington. And welcome to our budget hearing. I'm going to now pass it off to Bishop Mary Ann for a welcome.
Thanks, Tom. Just a word of thanks to all of you who are on the call. Very grateful to you. A bit of explanation. We had budget presentations at all of the regional meetings throughout the months of October and November. And so if you were present at those, you would have heard those presentations. What we'll present tonight isn't radically different from that, but there are some significant differences. And we thought it was important to walk through those for those of you who were at your regional meetings. And perhaps you weren't able to be at the regional meeting. It's one final chance before convention to raise questions that we can answer in advance. And so I want to thank you for taking the time yet again in an evening, a snowy evening at that, where we can be together as diocesan community to reflect on things getting ready for convention. So thanks. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Bishop. All right, so as you heard, tonight we're going to discuss the 2026 diocesan budget that will be presented and voted on at convention. So the draft budget was circulated, as the bishop said, at late October, presented at 4 different regional events. There's been some changes, and that's what Joe will go over tonight. Just a note, and Alan, if you want to put that first slide back up. This evening, if you just please keep yourself muted at all times unless you're called upon to speak. And then if you're invited to speak, please start by sharing your name and your parish, and then be very brief. So we'll get right to the point of your question or comment. Please, when we get to questions, put your question in the chat, and I'm going to call on you in that order, but that'll just help us keep track of the order which questions come in. So Mr. Joe Alcock is going to be our presenter tonight. He is the chair of the Diocesan Finance Committee. After Joe's presentation, we'll open the floor for questions. This meeting should be under an hour, but we're going to take the time it takes tonight to answer your questions. Are there any questions before we get started? All right, well, let's begin in prayer. The Lord be with you. Almighty and ever-living God, source of all wisdom and understanding, be present with those who take counsel in the Episcopal Diocese of Washington for the renewal and mission of your church. Teach us in all things to seek first your honor and glory. Guide us to perceive what is right, and grant us both the courage to pursue it and the grace to accomplish it. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
At this point, let me hand it off to Joe Alcock, the chair of the Diocesan Finance Committee.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Tom. All right, everyone. Trying to just make sure. Are the slides being shared yet? I don't know if it's just. It's right here. Okay, great. Awesome. Whoa. Yeah, great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Joe Alcock, and I'm a member of St. Francis Potomac and chair of the Diocesan Finance Committee. One of the Finance Committee's primary responsibilities is preparing and monitoring the annual operating budget of the diocese, which is why I'm here tonight to present the proposed 2026 diocesan operating budget. Before we dive into the budget, for those who may be new to the process, it may be helpful to briefly explain how the diocesan budget is developed. The budget process begins in early September when the bishop's staff prepare an initial draft based on known priorities and anticipated needs for the year ahead. Throughout the fall, the budget undergoes multiple revisions with review and discussion each month by both the Diocesan Council and the Finance Committee. A draft of the budget was circulated to vestries and presented at the regional gatherings for broader feedback. One example of how that feedback was incorporated is that at the start of the regional gatherings in October, the diocese had initially budgeted a 1% increase in congregational giving. After hearing from parishes across the diocese about the challenges they are facing in these unprecedented times, that increase was removed and congregational giving as budgeted remained flat, as reflected in the budget before you tonight. The goal of this budget is to ensure responsible stewardship of diocesan resources and to present a budget at diocesan convention that aligns with the priorities of the diocesan strategic plan. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Oop. Sorry, I had my little thing here. As I kind of work through this, sorry, apologies. So continuing with the slide that was presented at last year's convention, it is helpful to ground us in the diocesan's primary revenue streams and how they have trended over the past several years. This slide shows historical diocesan revenues from 2020 through 2026, grouped into three categories: congregational giving, SOPR fund income, and other revenue. There are two main revenue drivers in the diocesan budget. The largest is congregational giving, which is cash contributions directly from our parishes. The second largest driver is investment income from the SOPR fund, referred to as SOPR fund income. The remaining revenue comes from a variety of other sources, including interest and dividend income, the bishop's annual appeal, and designated and grant-based funding such as the Lilly Endowment grants. Over the 6-year period, total diocesan revenue has increased, with growth driven primarily by SOPR fund income and other designated or grant-supported revenue. Congregational giving declined during the pandemic years and has since stabilized, remaining flat at approximately $2.3 million in the proposed 2026 budget. As illustrated in this graph, recent revenue growth is driven primarily by diocesan investment income and grant-supported revenue, rather than increases in congregational giving. As we turn to the budget itself, a reminder that it is diocesan policy that the budget be balanced, and therefore budgeted revenue equals budgeted expenses. And with that, as we can turn to the next slide, please. So as we review the slides, please note that there's more detailed breakout of the budget, particularly for the salary and benefits and general administrative expenses. I'm not sure if that was included in the link that went out tonight, but I know it's included in the on the convention package, beginning on page 26. And so on this slide, the left column represents the 2025 budget that was approved at last year's convention, and the right column reflects the proposed 2026 diocesan operating budget. Total revenue in the proposed 2026 diocesan operating budget is approximately 5.5 million, an increase of almost 800,000, or approximately 16.8% over the 2025 budget. And we'll go through kind of some of those key changes here with those. I mentioned this previously, but congregational giving remains the largest source of the diocesan revenue and is unchanged from 2025, budgeted at 2,275,000. Soper fund operating income is budgeted at approximately 1,750,000 in 2026. This reflects a 4.4% draw on the 3-year rolling average of the trust's year-end balance, which is a reduction from the 4.5% draw in 2025. At the recommendation of both the Diocesan Investment Committee and the Finance Committee, the diocese continues to reduce the annual draw on the Soper Trust with a long-term goal of reaching a 4% draw in order to preserve the real inflation-adjusted value of the trust. The closed parish fund draw is budgeted at 284,500, an increase of approximately 160,000 from 2025. The fund consists of net proceeds from real estate disposition following the closure of a parish, a policy established by Diocesan Council in 2006, which identifying the support of new church plants as the primary use for this fund. In 2026, funding will support 3 diocesan initiatives: continued efforts for the well in Bowie, Maryland, Water and Wilderness Church in Washington, D.C., and a community organizer position in Southeast D.C., as the diocese discerns future ministry following the closure of St. Philip's Anacostia. Regarding the Lilly Endowment grants, there are 2 income lines related to the Lilly Endowment grants. The first Lilly grant was awarded several years ago to support the Tending Our Soil Congregational Revitalization Initiative and concludes in 2026. A second Lilly Endowment grant, Planting Seeds of Renewal, builds on this work through many grants and skill building opportunities, expanding access to resources so that more congregations can strengthen their capacity for thriving ministry and deepen a culture of vitality across the diocese. The Corton Education Fund was established through a generous bequest to support education initiatives at the discretion of the bishop. In 2026, 143,000 will support the School for Christian Faith and Leadership, including half of the compensation for the Canon for Faith, Leadership, and Collaboration, and the school's operations coordinator. Other key revenue items are the bishop's annual appeal of 160,000, which is an increase of 10,000. Interest and dividend income of 200,000, which is an increase of 40,000. 60,000 from the Protestant Episcopal Church Foundation, or PECF, reimbursing the diocese for a portion of Bishop Mary Ann's compensation related to her work with the Cathedral Close institutions. 2 additional items are new in 2026. First, there's no change to the underlying arrangement, however, beginning in 2026, the diocese is formally recognizing the in-kind contribution associated with the use of the church house. The amount shown, estimated at 255,000, reflects the fair market value of rent and utilities. There's a corresponding increase in general administrative expenses, so this change has no net impact on the operating budget. Second, because Water and Wilderness Church and the Bowie Church Planter are technically missions of the diocese, grants and other funds supporting these ministries are recorded as diocesan revenue. And with that covers the main revenue sections, and we can turn to the next slide, please. And so as we begin to talk through the expenses, again, as I mentioned earlier, as required by diocesan policy, expenses equal revenue. Therefore, total expenses in the proposed 2026 diocesan operating budget is 5.5 million, which is also an increase of 800,000 or approximately 16.8%. But just want to call that out of the increases in revenue are also increases in our expenses. And so diving in on church revitalization. So it's budgeted at approximately 383,000, an increase of 143,000. The primary drivers of this increase are the funding for strategic advisors has been restored to provide outside professional guidance and to compensate seasoned clergy assisting congregations and leadership transitions. Lilly grant expenditures reflecting the final year of tending our soil and continued work under the new grant, planting seeds of renewal, are incorporated in that, with any staff salaries expenses are reflected down below and are discussed further in the presentation. For faith and leadership, for the next slide, please. So faith and leadership is budgeted at 211,000, an increase of 15,000. A small reduction in campus and young adult ministries, which is aligning spending with recent experience. And then there's an increase for the clergy discernment and development due to rising costs associated with the annual clergy conference. Equity and justice remains budgeted at 58,500. Again, staff costs appear in salaries and benefits below. An item to note is that funds for financial reparations, as approved at Diocesan Convention last year, will be drawn from diocesan assets once the Reparations Committee has direction of their work. Next slide, please. For national and international ministries, the category is budgeted at 621,000, an increase of approximately 73,000. The primary driver of that increase is the diocese's 604,000 assessment to the Episcopal Church, which represents approximately 15% of the 2024 diocesan operating budget. That is a total of 67,000 from an increase from prior year. In addition, a new line item has been added for the EDOW Ecumenical Commission, restarting its work under the leadership of the Reverend Aaron Dunn. The commission will focus on fostering dialogue and relationships with other faith traditions and on providing education resources across the diocese. Regarding salaries and benefits, total salaries and benefits are budgeted at $3,127,000, an increase of approximately $265,000. There's in your convention package, there is a breakout of the individuals that make up that total salary, the individual jobs that make up this amount that you can refer to. However, the key changes from the 2025 budget to the 2026 budget includes 1/3 time for the assistant bishop, Bishop Eugene Sutton, and the Water and Wilderness church planter, Reverend Peter Nunnally. Again, half of that is funded by the Closed Church Parish Fund, and the coordinator of the East of the River Ministry Initiative, Reverend Melanie Mullen, which is also funded from the Closed Parish Fund. New or reconfigured positions partially funded by the Lilly grants include the Canon to the Ordinary, Canon for Faith Leadership and Collaboration, and the Missioner for Revitalization. All staff salaries except for the bishop at her request include a 2% increase. The cost of benefits for all staff is shown as a single line item. Benefits include health insurance and pension assessments. Health insurance premiums for most plans are expected to increase by at least 6%. Most diocesan staff receive health insurance coverage, with the diocese covering approximately 80% of the premium costs. Going down here into the general administration and governance. So as regarding the general administrative expenses, as a reminder, these are broken out in further detail on page 27 of the Diocesan Convention booklet. But as mentioned earlier, with the $296,000 increase in G&A, 255,000 of that is due to the in-kind donation of the church house that I mentioned earlier from the revenue line item. And this is where it nets itself out in our 2026 operating budget. Two other significant changes in the general administrative expenses for the proposed 2026 budget include increases for the outside firm that provides diocesan accounting services, which is Vault Consulting, and the addition of a new line item to assist Maryland parishes with filing articles of incorporation. And with that, can we turn to the next slide? And from the governance perspective, because there's no general convention this year, those are expected to remain flat and consistent with what we had for the 2025 budget. And so with that, I hope this overview has provided a clear understanding of the 2026 budget. I believe the bishop and staff, working with the Finance Committee and Diocesan Council, have produced a realistic budget that advances the strategic plan while making prudent use of the diocesan resources. And thank you to the vestries, clergy, and lay leaders who have provided feedback through the process. And I believe with that, we will open it up to questions. Right, Tom?
That is correct. Thank you, Joe.
Great.
So just reiterate again, if you have questions, please use the chat. That way we can keep track of who's of the order that we're going in. And if you could just put your question, or at least some sense of the subject of your question in the chat, we can take people in order. Unless Joe was absolutely clear as a bell and there are no questions. All right, as you all are thinking, I would just like to, again, just use the chat just so I can know who to call and just let me know. I saw a hand raised, but Joe said this already, but I'm just going to reiterate since I have the floor, that one of the biggest differences between the original budget and this budget is the recognition of the cathedral's gift to the Diocese of Church House, using Church House and the market rent and the utilities and some other things that they pay for the use of that. So, all right, Christine, thank you. You can go and come off mute and you can ask your question.
Okay, the audio is enabled. Yeah, I was just wondering, it's not a completely financial question, but how does water and wilderness work during weeks or seasons like this, especially weeks like this?
It is an excellent question. I am not, I don't think Joe is the one. I see the bishop came off mute though. So
I'm trying to Google it, but
Hi, Christine. What a great question. I would love for Pete Nunnally to be here, but what he has said is that their intention is to worship kind of whatever the weather. However, I do know that there was a week where they met, they chose a place to meet inside. And so I'm guessing that it is it's an evolving process, right? We certainly don't want people to be in danger. And there are obviously extremes of weather that are not safe. But I don't think it's going to be the case that if it's a little cold or unpleasant or rainy, that it will stop. But that's what I've heard from him so far.
thank you very much. And we have another question from Stephen Simpson. If you want to come off mute and ask your question.
Sure. This is Stephen Simpson. I'm from St. John's, Olney. My question is, when I was going through, unfortunately, I don't have the proposed in front of me. I've got copies of it. It's just not right here in front of me. But I was checking against the draft from the regional meetings. and looked like with your figures that salaries and benefits for 2026 went up from the draft from 2,954,000 and change to 3,127,000 and change, more change. So that's about roughly, I am not an accountant, but round figures, that's about $200,000. Where's the increase from the draft to the proposed?
Right, and that's a great question. The biggest one is the ministry feasibility. I think as we finalize the closed parish fund and kind of the draw that we would
Okay.
do on that, so if you look at that, you should see an increase in the closed parish fund and that one. And I don't know, Bishop, did you have a question also, or sorry? Yeah, I think that's the big driver from the kind of the way that the budget had evolved from what was presented at the regional gatherings. In addition, there's some, and definitely please let me know if this is not consistent with what you're seeing and kind of the versions that you're seeing. Also, the way that the church planters and the Water and Wilderness Church are. We
Okay.
went through some iterations on kind of how we would report that kind of gross versus net of including the revenue up in, like funds coming in, including that in the revenue line item or netting it against the salaries expense. And so I know at the folks at St. Andrews in the first presentation, the first regional gathering, we had netted that down. So it kind of looked like they were like their salaries were going down. And so that was since subsequently adjusted, kind of being another reason for the increase from the drafts that you
Okay.
looked at.
As I said, I am not an accountant, but that's enough for me to understand.
But yeah, and it's
That's great.
it's
I
a great
appreciate
question.
that.
And we definitely appreciate that question too.
Thank you, Stephen. We have another question from Chandra Lewis. Why is there a large difference between the two planter reimbursements? And Joe, I have some idea if you want me to start with that.
Yeah, definitely, Tom.
Okay, so they're very different models. So the Water and Wilderness Church is a congregation that does have people who give, and I believe pledge, and so that some of that money comes back into our budget, as Joe was just explaining, both on the revenue and then the expense side. And there are some revenue items associated with the well also, including a grant from the Episcopal Church. And I believe, and Bishop Marion, you can correct me if you this, but I believe also some funding from Holy Trinity for her work as chaplain there. Is that correct?
Yes, again, it's a great question. We made the decision 2 years ago to fully fund the well as a full-time church planter for 2 years. That has been extended for 2 years with some modest income these first 2 years and now the third from, as Tom was saying, from a few grants from the Episcopal Church and also as compensation for Rondija Jarrett Shell's work at Trinity School as chaplain, which is a great mission site for her in building the church. The Water and Wilderness Church came to us from a different way, and Pete Nunnerly made a proposal to us and came to us with a commitment to have already raised half of the costs for the Water and Wilderness Church, recognizing that it was somewhat of a risk for the diocese to take, since it was not something that we had raised up on our own, but that he had come to us wanting and believing that he could plant within the Diocese of Washington. And so we decided to take that risk. It felt like a strong risk, and we felt like it was worth taking. I hope does that help clarify a little bit?
Yes, it did. Thank you so very much. I was just interested in it. It's such a big
Sure.
So thank you.
Yeah.
And Chandra, I want to apologize. I didn't let you ask the question. I asked it myself. So
that's quite all right. But I'm from St. Paul's, Raccoon. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. The next question is from Britton. If you want to come off mute, and I won't
Ed
ask you a
Britton.
question.
Oh,
Is it Ed? Like, yeah.
yes, there we go.
Yeah.
I was just curious, given the fact that the congregational giving is now budgeted as remaining flat, how that plays in with the anticipated effects under the targeted giving resolution that's proposed for the convention.
I can take a
Yeah.
stab at that. And that's I think the most important thing is that if that resolution passes, it does not take effect this year. So there were other reasons why we kept that number flat, and I think maybe the bishop put you on the spot again for
Sure.
that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Ed. It's a great question. And we heard feedback, particularly in the beginning, in the early stages of the regional process, when congregational leaders were, particularly those whose congregations had been affected dramatically by the number of people that had lost their jobs through the reductions of the federal workforce, some real concerns about making budget. And there was a sense that it felt a little, I think the word was tone deaf, that we would have a conversation about congregational giving at that time. And we heard that pretty loud and clear. And the committee went back and debated whether or not that they would postpone or delay the passing of the resolution. And they, in the end, decided not to do that. They were going to go ahead with a 1-year timeline with every caveat of understanding if things become even more difficult in the coming year. And I see Jessica's nodding her head, so I think I've characterized that accurately. But what we did as a diocesan, as we were planning for the operating budget in 2026, we thought it would be prudent not to assume that congregations as a whole would be able to increase even a modest amount in 2026. Some congregations did very well with their pledge drives this year, so it's not a universal thing. But others reported to us that it was really hard to make budget. And so that's why we made the decision not to increase the anticipated receiving of pledges for this year.
Right. Yeah, well, that's very helpful, Bishop. Thank you. I guess the only follow-up question is whether for 2027, when the resolution would start to take effect, whether it's anticipated that we would see a shift in the congregational portion of the diocesan budget at that point.
I can't speak for the committee, but I heard Jessica say many times, and I'll let her come off mute if she liked, but that there wasn't the expectation that there would be a dramatic change right away, that we're expecting this to be an evolving journey for congregations. But Jessica, do you want to jump in on that, since I know you were really involved in that?
Yeah, I'm sorry that I don't look very professional. I've been fighting with some blocks of ice today. But yes, we don't expect that this shift, I mean, it just seems like it's going to happen more organically with the congregations, and that, people will need time to ramp up to it. Since it's not a requirement, it's something, it sets a goal and a standard for us to strive for, then it'll happen over time. So we don't expect any drastic increases in income. That's not the point of the resolution.
I think pardon me if I might jump in, one more point about the budgeting process is we always aim to be conservative in the area of revenue, and sort of, cautious in the area of expenses, so that we're well positioned for unexpected things. Budgeting, as one of my old mentors used to say, is the substitution of error for chaos. So we don't really know what's going to happen. It won't be exactly what the budget is, but by creating a budget that is conservative for revenue, we're well positioned to execute on it.
And sorry, for those of you who don't know, that was Jonathan Nicholas, our diocesan treasurer. So thank you, Jonathan. I don't see any other questions, so I think, unless I see anything else, I think we'll move on. Before bringing this to a close, I just want to walk through just a couple important details about convention, just to remind you all. It is this Saturday. Registration opens at 7:45. There'll be breakfast and coffee available. At 8:45, we'll do a practice vote, and we would really like as many people to participate in that practice vote as possible. So please try to arrive on time for that. We'll begin morning worship at 9 o'clock, and the first business session will start right after that. If you know that an alternate will be taking the place of a delegate, please complete the seating of an alternate form online and let us know. We want to make sure that we account for everyone. Please remember to bring a fully charged laptop or tablet with you on the day of convention. It's important. That's how we're doing the convention booklet, as you saw, it was noted earlier. So we're not printing them. So that's the way you're going to be able to view them. The election booklet is also something you'll want to download. Some people find it easier to vote on their phone, so they bring both a laptop or a tablet and their phone. But that is up to you. You can also vote through your laptop or your tablet. And with that is what we have for you tonight. So I just want to, again, thank you for being here. Thank you, Joe, for your presentation. Thank you all for your questions. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
Everyone,
Thank you.
Tom, could
Good
you stay
night.
on for a sec? Thank you, everyone. So good to be with you. See you on Saturday.